All right, this morning we're going to finish up Acts chapter 9. But I'm going to tell you, when we get to Acts chapter 10 next Sunday morning, we're going to come to one of the greatest turning points in the history of the church, because the door is now going to be opened for the Gentiles to become Christians without first having to become a Jew. John 3:16 will become a reality as we move into chapter 10. We're going to see that God really does love all people and not specifically just the Jews. But from where we are now in Acts chapter 9 until where we're going to be when we get to Acts chapter 10, God has a lot of work to do on one of the disciples. He's got a lot of work to do on the apostle Peter. He needs to stretch Peter. He needs to move Peter. He needs to open Peter up to get him to the place where he will be obedient enough to go into the home of a Gentile man and share the gospel with him and his family. And so the stories that we're going to look at this morning are part of that stretching process. They're part of the process that's going to get Peter where he needs to be in order to go into the Gentiles' house. Now, I want to look at this map right here, and this is a map of Israel, and I'm going to point out the cities that we're talking about here. And so, the green circle is Jerusalem, and around Jerusalem, that whole area is Judea, and this is where the bulk of the Jews lived during this time. The further west you went, it would become more Gentile. And so the red circle is Lydda. All right. Interesting fact about Lydda, if you go to Israel today, the Tel Aviv airport where you'll fly into is built over the ancient city of Lydda. And if you continue to go west, you'll go to Joppa. All right. Joppa is on the west coast. That would be the Mediterranean coast. It is a very beautiful city, but during this time and today, it's very highly populated with Arabs. And also, by the way, this is the port where Jonah in the whale, he got on the boat and got on the boat and went to Nineveh. But it's a very beautiful place. And then if you go north from there along the coast, there's a city called Caesarea. Caesarea during this time was really important because it was the Roman capital of the region, and it was very Gentile. It had pagan temples. There were theaters. There were arenas where they would have race horses and chariot races and gladiator games. And so this was a very Gentile area. The more west you went, the more Gentile it became. So why did Peter go there? Why did he travel outside of Jerusalem and go west? Well, the reason that he did is because if you remember back early on in Acts, on the day of Pentecost, there were thousands of people that became Christians on the day of Pentecost. And now these Christians, and some of them were even Jews, have moved out west of Jerusalem. And so all Peter's doing is just going to check on them. He's going to take care of them. He's going to minister to them. And you know that as Peter's leaving Jerusalem and moving west toward these areas, it had to become more and more uncomfortable because the Gentile culture dominated this region. And so it had to be very uncomfortable for Peter as he went west. Now, the two miracles that we're going to look at this morning in these two stories are really important. And let me tell you why they're important, because they kind of point to Jesus. Think about it. This first miracle is similar to a miracle that Jesus performed. If you remember, in Luke chapter 5, Jesus healed this man that was paralyzed. And what did he say to the man? He said, "Take up your mat and go home." And that's similar to what Peter does right here. Peter heals this man by the name of Aeneas, who is paralyzed. And in my translation, he says, "Take up your bed, go home." And so we got a similar miracle. Same thing with the second miracle. Jesus, in Luke chapter 8, raised a little girl who was Jairus' daughter. He was the leader of the synagogue. He raised her up by saying these words, "Little girl, get up." And that's similar to what Peter does right here. When he raises Tabitha, he said, Tabitha, get up. And what is significant about this is that it points to the fact that the gospel is moving towards the Gentiles just like it is the Jews. Right? Just like it is the Jews. And the final evidence here that Peter is being stretched by God to get him to a place where he's ready for chapter 10 is the fact that he goes, in the end of chapter 9, he goes and he stays in the house of a man by the name of Simon the tanner. A tanner during this time was someone who dealt with dead animals. The Jews would have looked at a tanner and thought that profession, that job is totally unclean. As a matter of fact, a tanner could not be located and do business within 50 miles of a Jewish town or a Jewish city. And so God is stretching Peter in these two stories to get him prepared for chapter 10. And you know, I think that God stretches us as well. I certainly think that God has stretched a lot of Christians. There have been a lot of Christians in the past that dealt with racial prejudice, and God had to stretch them to get them to understand that He loves people of all races, and we need to love them, and we need to minister to people of all races. And I still think God needs to stretch us a lot even today to get us to open our eyes to different things that are good, to different things that we need to be doing. Y'all, the Southern Baptist Church, y'all, we've been filled with so many cultural traditions that we've gotten to believe that they are biblical. And I think we need to be stretched a little bit, all of us. We need to be stretched to be open to different ways of worship, to different styles of music, to even when it comes down to the dress that we wear. Y'all, there are a lot of people that believe that you've got to dress a certain way before you go to church, and that is biblical. And y'all, I think sometimes we just need to be stretched, and we need to be opened up to different ways of doing things that are just as biblical as the way that we've always done things. Okay? Now, I want to give you 3 truths for application that we see from this text. All right, truth number 1. Taking care of God's people leads to the lost people coming to Christ. Taking care of God's people leads to lost people coming to Christ. Now, let's go back and let's look at the text. Look at verse 32. As Peter was traveling from place to place, he also came down to the saints who lived in Lydda. All right? Lydda was the red circle. Verse 35, jump down to 35. So all who lived in Lydda and Sharon saw him and turned to the Lord. Now, remember, Peter was not on an evangelistic trip. The reason that he went out west was to take care of the Christians who had moved out that way to minister to them, to care for them. So this was not an evangelistic trip. Now, if you allow me for just a second to chase a rabbit, I want to talk about different biblical translations. The translation that I'm looking at and reading from is the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible, and it uses the word, in the end of verse 32, it uses the word saints. He also came down to the saints who lived in Lydda. The NIV replaces the word saints with this phrase, the Lord's people. If you look at the New Living Translation, it replaces the word saints with believers. And so you got to think about it. The goal of a Bible translator is to make sure that the meaning of the original text is what is understood by the reader at a particular time. All right? We want to maintain the original meaning. Unfortunately, the word saint today does not mean the same thing as the word saint meant back in the first century. Today, when people think of that word saint, what we have an image of in our mind is this great Christian like St. Paul or St. Peter or maybe Mother Teresa or even Billy Graham. We've got this image of our mind of these super Christians. But y'all, the word saint in the first century was just another word. It was the same as Christian. That's all it meant. A saint was another word for a Christian, a believer, a follower. All right? And what we have to remember, there are no levels of Christianity. All right? You're either a saint or you're an ain't. All right? If you're a Christian, you're a saint. If you're not a Christian, you're an ain't. All right? And so, thanks for letting me chase that rabbit, but let's get back to the story right here. And so what you will find when you study the New Testament is that the early Christians, all right, what they did, they focused more on making sure that other Christians understood what it meant to live the Christian life as much or more than they did going out and evangelizing. And I believe if you think about it, the two they're closely related. Because if someone doesn't learn what it means to be a Christian and how you're supposed to live as a Christian, then you're not going to be able to have an influence on people who are lost. We need to be living our lives in such a way that people look at us and it is so attractive that they want what we have. As a matter of fact, this is exactly what Paul said in Titus chapter 2. I want to read verses 9 and 10. All right, he said, slaves must always obey their masters and do their best to please them. And I know it's talking about a slave and a master, but y'all, we can apply this in our lives as well. The principle is the same. Look at what he says. They must not talk back or steal, but must show themselves to be entirely trustworthy and good. And then listen to this. Then they will make the teaching about God, our Savior, attractive in every way. And so what I'm saying is we need to make sure that we are growing in our Christian life. We are living a Christian life. We're exemplifying what it means to be a follower of Christ. Because if we do that, then it's going to put us in a position to attract people, to lost people to look at us and say, you know what, I really want what you want. And so when we learn to live the Christian life, it's going to put us in a position to reach more lost people. And y'all, that's really important. And it is, y'all, it is very important for us to work on being the follower of Christ that we're called to be. Now, nobody's perfect. None of us are perfect, but each one of us can be striving to live a life of purity. We can be striving to live a holy life because God is holy. We can strive to eliminate sin in our lives, not because it makes us feel bad, but because it upsets God. All right? And so we need to live the Christian life. We need to learn to live the Christian life more and more each day because it will lead to lost people being saved. Truth number 2. We need to point to Jesus as the source of everything good in our lives. All right? He is the source, and we need to point that. We need to point people to Jesus and say, He is the source of everything good in my life. Look at verse 34. Peter said to him, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Get up and make your bed. And immediately he got up. Now, what we see here is Peter wants to make sure that this fellow by the name of Aeneas understands that it wasn't him. Peter wasn't the one that performed the miracle. It was Jesus. He wanted to make sure that all eyes were on Jesus. And I think this is a really important point that we need to realize, because we need to make sure it is very tempting for us as the church, as Christian organizations, as Christians. It's really easy for us to get confused and we get messed up and we take our eyes off of Jesus and we want other people to put their focus on us instead of Him as well. For example, rarely today will you ever see a church that is having some event or they're trying to bring people into the church. Rarely will you ever see them not put up a banner in the front yard, put up signs. If they're trying to bring more people in the church, and even when it comes to renovating and doing things like that, it is really easy for us to lose our focus and want people to put their eyes on the church or on the Christian organization or even on us as an individual. And we just need to be very careful about that, because our focus, we want to bring people here, but our focus has to be on Jesus and not ourselves. And that's what we need. We need to be willing to tell people, hey, Jesus is the source of every good thing that we have. All right? He's the source of every good thing that we have. Now, let me say this. this involves us speaking with our mouths. And I hear this a lot, and look, I believe that these are well-meaning people, but I've heard this over and over and over. People will say this: I don't witness with my words, I witness by the way I live my life. And y'all, that all sounds good, but can I ask you a question? If all you do is witness by the way that you live your life, how's anybody going to know who it is you're a witness for? Are they just supposed to assume that? Are they just supposed to figure that out on their own? Let me give you an example. Let's say that you are striving to live the best Christian life that you can. You're trying to be pure. You're trying to be holy. You're trying to live your life in a way that is pleasing to God. You don't live like everybody else. When everybody else gets angry, you don't get angry. You kind of let things go. When everybody else is filled with stress and over petty things, you don't do that. You're trying to live your life filled with joy. You're trying to be a positive influence on others. And so that's the way that you're living your life. And that's a good thing. We ought to. And what if somebody comes up to you and says, I've noticed that you live your life differently. Can I ask you a personal question? What is it that makes you different? Are you a vegetarian? And so that would be a ridiculous example, but the truth is, if all we do is live out our witness by the way that we live our lives, y'all, we're gonna miss out on the opportunity to tell people that Jesus is the source of every good thing in our lives. And so that's the second application. We need to be willing to speak, to use the words that we have to point people to Jesus and say, look, He is the source of every good thing that we have in our lives. All right? Now, third point. We need to live so that we are really missed by people when we die. All right, let's go to verse 36. In Joppa, there was a disciple named Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. She was always doing good works and acts of charity. About that time, she became sick and she died. After washing her, they placed her in a room upstairs. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples heard that Peter was there and sent 2 men to him who urged him, don't delay in coming with us. Peter got up, he went with them. When they arrived, they led him to the room upstairs, and all the widows approached him, weeping and showing him the robes and clothes that Dorcas made while she was with them. And so what we see here is Peter is in Lydda, 11 miles away, 11 miles west from that. In Joppa, there's this lady by the name of Tabitha who dies. And it's obvious from the text that these people loved her so much, she was so important to them, they didn't think they could make it without her. And so they're crying, they're weeping. And so what was it that made her so cherished to these Christians there? Well, God had given her a gift. God gave her the gift to sew. And so what she would do, she would sew clothes together for the widows and probably for more poor people around. And we might not think that doing this, sewing clothes for widows and poor people, would qualify someone for the Christian Hall of Fame. But let me tell you, what she did for these widows and these poor people was important to them. It made a difference in their lives. I read a story this week. Last year, Deputy Ignacio Diaz died in a car accident in Palm Beach County, Florida. A nearby boy by the name of Charlie Ossip wanted to do something, so he set up a lemonade stand to raise money for Diaz's family. When Fox News asked Charlie why he had done this, he replied, I just saw a need, and I just thought that is what Jesus would do. I thought I could help. And y'all, our giving, our helping is as simple as that. It's as simple as that. As a matter of fact, have you ever noticed in the Bible, and you look at the biblical characters, the ones who had the least did the most? And that's what we have here with Tabitha. She may not have had a lot, but she used what she had, and she made a difference in the lives of these people. She made clothes for them. It made a huge difference in their lives. And so she died. The people hear that Peter is in Lydda, and so they call for Peter. They want him to come. And in the process, they break the traditional ritual when it comes to burying somebody. The traditional ritual, by the way, they were supposed to have the body in the ground within 24 hours. That was the law. And so they'd already broken that, but the ritual was that you would take the dead body, you would wash it, you would clean it up, you would wrap it with burial cloth, you would pour perfume on it to help mask the stench, the smell of decay, and then you would put the body in the grave or in the ground. That was the way that they did it, but they broke tradition because they took the body, washed it, and put it in a room upstairs because they had heard that Peter was in Lydda, and they hoped that he could come and he could perform some miracle. He could raise her back to life. And so Peter walks into this room and with his dead body, and there are people everywhere. These widows, they're crying, they're wailing. And I just want to say this before I move on. Y'all, there are a lot of people who think that you shouldn't cry for a Christian when they die. That it's just a celebration. And yes, it is a celebration. But let me tell you, if you look throughout the New Testament at a lot of the funerals, there were Christians who were crying because other Christians died. And I know that we don't cry like those who have no hope. That's what Paul told us in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13. We don't cry as people who have no hope because we know where that person is. But at any rate, when you lose someone that's important to you, when you lose someone that's done a lot for you, you ought to cry, you ought to mourn. It's okay. It's okay to do that. Now, look at verse 40. Peter sent them all out of the room. He knelt down, he prayed, and turning toward the body, he said, "Tabitha, get up." She opened her eyes, saw Peter, and sat up. He gave her his hand and helped her to stand up. He called the saints and the widows. There's that word saints again. So what did he do? He called the Christians and the widows and presented her alive. This became known throughout Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And so Peter goes into the room. He asks everybody to leave, gets on his knees, prays, says, "Tabitha, get up." And she raises up, and he helps her up, and she's been healed. She's been brought back to life. And I know that these people were so glad because she was so important to them and their lives. Now, this is where the title of this sermon comes from. A few years ago, there was a guy by the name of Patrick Morley, and he wrote a book, and the title of the book was The Man in the Mirror. And so he spoke of a time in this book where he and his wife were so busy in their activities that they had little time for their friends. They had little time for their family. They'd even gotten so busy they had little time for their children. They were so busy coaching sports and making sure their kids were involved in this sport and this activity and that one over there. They were involved in community activities, helping out in this activity and over there. And they were involved at work. They did extra stuff at work. They were involved in projects at school, and they did all these things. And they were so busy. And they realized that all of this was done to please people that they hardly even knew. And so they made a decision to prioritize their lives according to who will cry at their funeral. And I want to ask you a question. Are you living your life right now so that people will truly cry at your funeral? I'm not talking about your spouse. I'm not talking about your kids. I'm talking about other people. Because you've made such a difference in their lives, will they cry at your funeral? I do a lot of funerals as a pastor. I've done a lot in my ministry. And I try to do two things when I have a funeral. I try to talk good, say some good things about the person, and talk about Jesus. All right? Say something good and talk about Jesus. Matter of fact, if you look at the word funeral, in the Greek, the word is eulogy, and the literal translation from the Greek to the English is a good word. And so I think it is inappropriate when you're doing a funeral to speak about someone's faults or sins. As a matter of fact, if you're doing the funeral of a Christian, I think it's theologically incorrect to speak of their faults or their sins, because that person's soul is with Jesus, and Jesus has forgiven and forgotten about sins. And for us to talk about those things here is totally inappropriate. Now, I will admit, I have done some funerals where it was really, really hard to find something good to talk about. But the point is this. I believe that those who really make a difference in the lives of other people, those who, well, when their funeral comes, they're going to be people that are crying. They're not just good, moral people. How many times have you heard somebody say, that was a good person? But those who really make a difference, they're not just good, they're not just moral. They're people that have received God's grace because they've trusted in Jesus. And Jesus has transformed their lives. And the transformed lives lead to them learning to become more and more like Christ and living their lives like Christ, so that the things they do, the words they speak, the actions they take attract people because they look like Jesus. They attract people. And y'all, that's the bottom line. Are we living our lives in such a way? Are we living out the Christian life in such a way that we're making so much of a difference in other people's lives that when we die, it's almost going to be like there's an open hole, there's a void. They can't go on without us. They can. But is that the way that we're living our lives? I want to close with this illustration. Lewis Laws became the warden of the Sing Sing maximum security prison in Ossining, New York in 1920. It was a tough prison that was considered to be ungovernable. They had 9 wardens in the past 8 years. The inmates said the quickest way to leave Sing Sing was to become the warden. Lewis and his wife, Catherine, were strong Christians. They believed in treating each inmate as a soul loved by God. Catherine was warned over and over, never step inside the prison, but instead she would come and bring their 3 children with her and sit in the stands with the prisoners as prison ball games took place. She would visit the prisoners. She would run errands for them. She would listen to them and hear their hurts. She made it so the blind prisoners could learn Braille, and she learned sign language so that she could talk to the deaf prisoners. 17 years after they arrived, Catherine lost her life suddenly in a car accident. The body was brought to the warden's home by the prisoners. The warden's home was close to the prison. Catherine was so loved by the prisoners that the prison did something that day that today would seem amazing. You would think you couldn't do that. They opened the door of the prison and allowed the prisoners to walk over to the house to pay their respects to Catherine and the family, and then walk back to the prison all on their own. And you know what? Not a single prisoner tried to escape, because this Christian lady had made a difference in each one of their lives. And so I'll close with this question right here. How many people have you made a huge difference in their lives, like Tabitha? How many people can you think of that when you die, you're going to have made a huge difference in their lives, like Catherine? How many people are going to die? How many people are going to cry at your funeral? Is it just going to be your spouse, your kids? Are there other people that are going to be so upset because you made such an impact in their lives that they're weeping, they're crying at your funeral? Let's pray.